Professor, a remarkable 24 hours.
Absolutely. I guess at one level this was expected, partly because of his age and partly because he'd been infirm. But at another, it seems to foreshadow an even more dramatic change in the monarchy because, of course, his widow, Queen Elizabeth, is in her mid-90s, and it is unclear how popular her offspring will be in terms of a succession. So on the one hand, I think there is a recognition of the contribution that Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, made, and on the other, probably a certain amount of anxiety as to the future of the constitutional system that Britain has.
Married for 73 years, he gave up so much but also took on so much. 800 charities, a founder of the Duke of Edinburgh Award, some extraordinary work in his life.
Yes, that's true. And of course, the interesting thing about him is that in a sense he was from the gentry poor, in that he was a member of one of the monarchies that collapsed in the wake of Republican agitation across Europe 100 years ago. He had connections to Denmark and Germany and to Greece, of course, his place of birth as an aristocrat. But when he arrived in Britain, he was essentially penniless despite this heritage, and in fact was seen at the time of the engagement in the early days of the marriage as something of an outsider. So in one sense, he was not just that child of privilege that we associate with monarchy. He was someone who had, in one way, to learn to be British, and his role was never clearly defined. But he found a place for himself, as you've suggested, in terms of various forms of public service.
An extraordinary tough life, wasn't it? Particularly early on, as you've just articulated there, to be schooled in Germany, then of course the Nazi regime came in, and then he transferred to Scotland. He served in the service. He lived with family when his mother was infirmed, and that kind of strength gave so much to those around him, in particular the Queen and everybody else in the royal family.
Well, that may well be so. Of course, it's hard for us to know the internal dynamics of a family, and there would be somewhat rather critical of his masculinity. He had a really rather sensitive son. They had a rather sensitive son in Charles. And of course, the boys were all sent off to Gordonston, the school where Philip himself had gone in Scotland. Severe times, cold water, no heating, hard beds, and so forth. And this model of service was wrapped up, no doubt, in his own remarkable ability to survive a very, very difficult and traumatic childhood. But you can ask questions about whether that's the way to raise a family. Some people are saying that anyway today.
He retired at the age of 96. He continued, though, with organisations such as the British Heart Foundation. What kept him going so long? And he was so fit for many of those years.
I think one element was the notion of service, and this is the word that you hear coined by many in the royal family, their notion that it is a matter of duty, that they should put others first, and that there should be a tireless and ongoing commitment both to the non-profit or non-government organisation or charitable sector, and also a commitment to democratic government in the countries of the Commonwealth. In addition to that, of course, the kind of masculinity we're talking about was a very active one. You know, a polo player, a cricketer, a horse rider. And that notion of a vigorous young man was very much in the currency of the day in the 40s and 50s, in the early days of their relationship and the Queen's ascent to the monarchy. And I think that image was something that was probably quite real, but was also cultivated and has continued on really until the very last year or so of his life.
Yeah, a remarkable life, absolutely extraordinary life. And this is a special of Weekend Edition. Thank you, Professor. Appreciate you coming on the show.